Hello, everybody. Welcome to BeerSmith Podcast number 53. Got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about eco brewing. I'd like to say Happy New Year to everybody. 2013 was a great year for us, thanks to all your support. BeerSmith, too, has been selling well. We've got our new mobile app out. BeerSmithRecipes.com is up over 38,000 beer recipes now. And I really appreciate all of your support. And now, without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, my guest is Amelia Loftus. She's a founding member of the organic brewing supply company, Seven Bridges Cooperative, and she's currently working on a book on eco-friendly brewing to be published in 2014. It's great to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about eco-friendly brewing. And I thought I'd start by asking you what eco-friendly brewing is. It's a topic I don't know that much about.
Well, it's basically brewing with, keeping in mind sustainability, keeping in mind the impact on the earth. And sometimes that goes beyond just thinking in direct terms, like if I dump this, wort in the gutter, where will that go? But thinking about the big picture and, the whole process of growing the crops for brewing ingredients, manufacturing equipment, brewing chemicals, all of those things are definitely things that we can consider if we're eco-minded brewers. And a lot of home brewers are, just as a matter of nature, eco-friendly because they're reusing equipment, reusing kegs, reusing bottles, economy of scale. We don't have the vast resources commercial breweries have, so we tend to, be conservative with our use of materials and cleaning supplies.
We're always
and
looking for ways to save money and build stuff ourselves too, right?
Put it that way too.
I notice a lot of homebrewers tend to be tinkerers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Do it yourself. Make your own gizmos and wort chillers and what have you. Yeah. And sometimes, making things in your own backyard is eco-friendly because you're not shipping stuff all the way around the world, or in some manufacturing, stuff is shipped from here to China and then back here and then back to China in different components. So it gets kind of crazy. And if you're making things yourself, there's a little cut down on that.
I think most of the stuff in my house came from China, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Probably yours too.
It's a reality of today.
Well, let's start with brewing supplies. What are some of the advantages, for example, of using organic ingredients, and what was sort of the founding philosophy behind Seven Bridges Cooperative when you I know it's quite a number of years ago you worked on it, but
yeah. Well, I'll step back even a little bit further. Mm-hmm. I spent 7 years working with Greenpeace, and that was an eye-opener. It really taught me a lot about how various human activities are impacting this planet that we call home and, what sustains us. And so that, really kind of built into my basic thinking about whatever I approached. And in the last few years that I was working with Greenpeace, I started brewing back in 93, 94, 95. Mm-hmm. And, of course, immediately thought of ways to brew sustainably. And the first few things I did, of course, were grow hops and seek out organic ingredients, because those are the, most two obvious things to do. So anyways, after a few years of trying to, brew a wide range of beers organically, it got very frustrating because as a home brewer, it's hard to find organic ingredients. That's why we founded Seven Bridges, to be, just a full resource of organic ingredients, carrying the full range of ingredients available. And so that's what got us started. And that, the company has grown quite a bit, mm-hmm. Mail order and selling to breweries. And one of the neat things about it is just seeing how demand affects supply. When we first started Seven Bridges, we had 4 kinds of hops, 1 malt extract, no dry malt extract, and I think 4 or 5 kinds of grain. So we had your basic pale malt or 2-row malt.
So have some of the major suppliers started to provide organic ingredients now, organic barley and so on?
Oh yeah. The selection has grown tenfold since those days.
Who are some of the suppliers that are providing it now?
Well, the malt is coming from Brees and
Mm-hmm.
Wireman, and I think there's an English one now. It's been a few years since
Yeah,
I actually
that's
managed
okay.
the company. I'm still one of the owners, but I'm not involved in the daily. So I think there's a Muntins
Mm-hmm.
and there's Gambrinus.
Mm-hmm.
And when the last trade show I went to, we were looking at bringing in some Belgian malts, which was, of course, very exciting. So these things are starting to be made. Of course, with hops, the supply has just exploded in the past 5 years. And a lot of that has to do with just brewing industry money. As more and more commercial breweries are brewing organic, they start to fund hop growing operations and buy organic hops, and that fuels the supply. So
what are some of the advantages of using organic hops or organic grains in your beer?
Well, the way that organic agriculture works is, of course, it's no chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, you're not spraying pesticides, herbicides, and there are some pretty nasty chemicals sprayed on hops, for instance. And so you eliminate that. The other big change is how crops are fertilized. Most commercial crops are fertilized with, chemical fertilizer.
Yeah.
And with organic growing, they use compost primarily, and that builds up biomass. And if you start to read up on the soil science, you see, growing things have an interrelationship. And so the beneficial microbes in the soil help the plants be healthier. And it's pretty complex stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to grow on a small scale crops myself, and I see it in action, and it's pretty incredible.
So is there a difference you can taste in the beer, say if you go with organic?
That's really hard to say, especially with the variety of beer and different brewing. I mean, there's so many factors that contribute to a final flavor in beer, techniques and ingredients, and it really. I think people who have a really refined taste sense can taste the terroir, the flavors from the land, and you'll get that with organic. I know
one thing is probably, for example, you probably get fresher hops in many cases or fresher grains than you might otherwise.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, okay.
Freshness depends on how it's handled. So, I know at Seven Bridges we really emphasize that, and because it was our only offering was organic, we had tended to have a good turnover, and our reputation was staked on having quality. But I've seen, even in our early days when things were slow, we would get hops that would sit around for years before they were sold. And I've seen, in other places, just grain that sits around too long and gets stale because the demand isn't as high at this stage in the game for organic ingredients.
So you mentioned you grow your own hops and barley, or at least have experimented with it. What have been some of your experiences with that? I mean, obviously we can't cover the whole topic today in terms of just we could do a whole show, I'm sure, on growing hops, but but I was just wondering if you could maybe share some of the lessons learned.
I'm really just starting to touch the tip of the iceberg with growing stuff. Big learning curve there. I have grown hops here and there for years, so I'm more familiar with that. This year was the first year I put any grain in the ground, and it ended up being chicken feed.
It didn't work out, huh?
Well, it did, but I didn't really have enough to even brew a batch of beer. So it grew fine, and I was able to thresh it in a befuddled sort of way, but it was just a few handfuls of grain, really. So, the plot of land I have is pretty small, and I have, some books on the subject and have read up on it enough to know it's possible, but I probably have to develop more fertility in the soil or bring in artificial fertilizer to make it happen more quickly. But I'm more patient and willing to wait and have a few lean years before I actually, have a real harvest, because it's more of a hobby than anything.
Sure, of course, yeah. So how about hops? What's your experience growing hops?
I've had great success and some not so great. It really depends on location. Unfortunately, where I am now, there's a lot of oak tree cover, and the hops do okay, but not great.
Yeah, they need sunlight, right?
Yeah, they just really love hot, sunny weather. And, we get some hot, sunny days, but we're in a valley, and then we have oak all around us. And so the daylight hours just aren't enough. And that's one thing the hop plant really, really digs is, long summer days. That's why they do so well, a bit north of us, because in the summertime, the days are longer and they just love it. They go nuts.
So have you had any challenges drying or processing the hops? I know some people have challenges with that the first couple times.
I haven't, mainly because I've, really only had a few ounce yield each year. Yeah. Enough to, do a few special batches. I grew this. And I doubt where I am right now I'm ever going to do more than that, just because I don't have the ideal growing climate. But if I did, if I lived over the hill in Gilroy, for instance, where they do have, just wide open, hot summer days, I might have better luck. The grain I'm thinking in the long term will be more profitable.
So, Amelia, what resources would you recommend for somebody looking to learn a little bit more about growing hops or growing grains?
I would start with a couple of books. There are several well-known books on growing hops, homegrown hops, and the Homebrewer's Garden are my favorites. Mm-hmm. I just picked up this book. I have to show it because I just read it and it was really good.
Read the title there for people that are listening. Yeah.
Homegrown Whole Grains.
And that's
by Sarah Pitzer. And I love it because it's very simple, straightforward. They just cover the basics of growing basic grains and harvesting them, because that's a big challenge. It's not like picking a tomato. You have to thresh them, and so different methods for threshing are covered. But most grains grow really well in a lot of different climates. They're easy to grow. It's a little bit trickier to, get the top grade and such. Malting barley's not that hard either. Malting grains, have done a bit of that just because, there's a lot of interest in gluten-free brewing, and you almost have to malt some grains yourself if you want to really delve into gluten-free brewing.
That's a topic I get asked on a lot. What do you recommend for folks that are looking to do gluten-free brewing?
Well, if beer is just the thing you've got to have, then working with gluten-free grains is where you got to go.
Some examples?
Buckwheat is probably the most popular because it has a really good flavor and it's really, really easy to malt. It grows super fast, and there's not a lot of threshing that you have to do. But you could grow millet, some of the quinoa, amaranth. I mean, any kind of grain can be malted, just about. It's a little tricky with some of them, but you basically sprout the grains. I have a bucket, just a food grade plastic bucket that I drilled a bunch of holes in the top, mm-hmm. and put the grains in there and soak them overnight, and then rinse them twice a day. And, things like wheat, because I do sprout wheat a lot too. Those take 3 or 4 days, depending on the outside temperature, or the temperature where you're sprouting, because plants will grow slower in the colder weather. And then you dry it out. And I have fortunate to have an oven that can dry things at 170, because that's a good temperature.
I know a lot of people also use like dehydrators, little food dehydrators to do that kind of thing.
Food dehydrators are great if you have, if you're really crafty and you want to make something, you can make a solar dehydrator that actually ventilates itself. You can go online and find plans, and it's fascinating stuff. Cool. I actually want to build one very badly, so I probably will in the next year. Even though we don't have a lot of sunlight here, we do have a hill that faces south, and it's a steep hill, so it's actually perfect. I have some solar panels up there, and I actually run all of my music and lights and all that when I'm brewing off of solar. In the back.
Good. Well, let's talk for a minute about choosing equipment for eco-friendly brewing. What are some of the considerations that come into play there?
Well, there's a lot, and I've been researching that a bit recently. You want to think in terms of first and foremost, is this safe? Is this going to be safe to contact my beer? And that's pretty straightforward, and most brewers think about that, and in the end up choosing usually stainless steel. Yeah. Or food grade plastic or glass to contact beer. But there are some surprising things to know. I mean, if you look at the manufacturing processes, I mean, making metal is quite the process, and it's very, very resource intensive. And because it's such a big industry, a lot of the metal industries have really stepped up their game in terms of being more sustainable. There's a lot of countries, the U.S. included, like the U.S. Department of Commerce has a what would you call it? They have a criteria for sustainability, and really encouraging industry to improve, the waste stream, the energy consumption, all of those things. So it's actually hard to get hard data on how much waste is produced when you make a stainless steel pot. That's incredibly difficult to find. So, just in terms of what I was researching, I found it better to just stick to generalities and look at overall industry statistics, come up with kind of a grading system. And stainless steel, fortunately, is one of the best materials. Even though it's very energy intensive to make, it has such a long service life. And that's something to consider too. Are you going to buy that cheap, very thin walled stainless steel pot made in China that, might actually be such a low grade of stainless steel, it will start to rust out if you store it outside? Or are you going to go for something that's a higher grade metal, thicker walled, that is going to last you? I mean, are you going to be brewing for years? I mean, I'm getting close to my 20-year mark as a home brewer, and I still have that first really nice stainless steel pot that I purchased. Yeah,
I think I made the classic mistake, which is you buy a little enamel pot, then buy a big enamel pot, then buy a bigger stainless pot, then buy a bigger stainless pot, or whatever, and or a bigger aluminum pot than a stainless pot, and had I just gone out and purchased that nice pot up front, I would have saved myself a lot of time and heartache, honestly.
Like my dad used to say, buy the best and only cry once. And the earth might cry less too. So,
can you give us some other examples of equipment you might pick out besides, say, pots?
Well, there's, wort chillers are a good example, and pretty much everybody uses copper. Yeah. And copper is fairly okay. I think I ended up scoring it a 5 on my 1 to 10 scale. Okay. I should try to pull that up. But, one of the things about copper is if you don't maintain it right, it can actually be a source of toxins in your brew. Like, you definitely don't want to stick in a wort chiller that's got that green patina on it. Yeah. To your wort, because that's going to put some toxins into your beer, and you definitely don't want that. And what
do you recommend for cleaning it? Something like that, because I know mine gets a little dark at times.
Actually, good old white vinegar works great. Yeah, it strips away that oxidation right away. So that's a really good choice. You don't want to use like anything containing peroxide, because that'll just have the opposite effect.
Now, what about the glass versus plastic debate that goes on with fermenters and so on?
I'm pretty much set on glass versus plastic, for a lot of reasons. If you're really environmentally concerned, everything about the plastic manufacturing industry is, a little scary when you really start to dig deep. And, I have to say the industry has done a lot in recent years to clean up their act. But, the fact remains that when you give it a score based on the criteria of, the toxics produced in manufacture, the energy consumed making it, the lifespan, and the disposal problem. Yeah. Plastic continues to be kind of a persistent problem.
Sure.
And, there are definitely better plastics and worse plastics. And, obviously food grade. I mean, we do have some good safety standards here in the U.S. But, there are a lot of things that are just coming to light. So we find out.
I've used both. I mean, I've used like the Better Bottle Carboys, and I for many, many years I used only glass. The only problem I found with glass is just, occasionally I do break one. Now, fortunately, I haven't broke one that's full of beer, but I mean, that's always a risk that you can bang it, bounce it or something, and next thing the whole thing's shattered on you. But
yeah, most of us dream of having the budget to buy stainless fermenters, and those are
giant
great.
Stainless conical fermenter, right?
Or even the little, the little Blickman ones. But yeah, I've been using glass since day one, and I have used plastic. And a recent brewing experience reminded me that there are times when it is actually sensible to use a plastic primary. We did a fruit beer, a holiday fruit beer with about 6 pounds of fruit in it, and racking that was a nightmare. And if we had it in a bucket with a spigot, it would have been problem solved in 10 minutes.
Well,
So.
Well, let's talk about the brewing process a little bit. And you I think you mentioned in at least the book that you're working on, talking about conserving water, conserving energy. How do you sort of minimize your footprint while you're brewing?
Oh, there's so many ways. It's kind of fun, especially if you like to be crafty and come up with different brewing rigs. For instance, the first kind of crafty thing I did with my cooling water was just pipe it into a washing machine and run a load of laundry in hot water from the wort chiller water after a batch of beer. So that's obviously, you reusing that hot water is a great way to help the environment, because you're A, reusing water that's perfectly usable, and B, you're reusing that heat energy.
Yeah.
As energy prices go up, cost more and more to produce every year. So, anytime you can come up with an idea like that. I
know that's probably where I use most of the water, is actually in that immersion chiller. There's quite a bit of water. There's quite a few gallons of water that go through there in the, say, 20 minutes it takes to cool down the wort.
Yeah. What I do, if I do a 5-gallon batch, I usually don't bother with my counterflow. I just use an immersion chiller, and I'll run that first 3 or 4 gallons into a bucket and use that for the cleanup. And then the rest, I just hook up to a sprinkler if it's that season and sprinkle the lawn.
Yeah, that's reusing it at least. Well, what are some other ways to be more energy efficient?
Well, one of the interesting things I just worked on is a solar water heater. And I first got this idea when I was up at the Organic Brewing Festival. I think it was in 2008 up in Portland, Oregon. And they had a solar water heater on site, and there was a homebrew club that came in and brewed a batch of beer with solar heated water. And the water can get hot enough to reach strike temperature. So basically, you don't have to use any heat energy. You don't have to turn the propane at all.
Until you start to boil, right?
Until you start to boil. So you basically do your whole mash. I believe the water was getting up to 165. So they could do the mash and sparge, and then put it in the kettle and then turn the heat on. And because it's already so warm, you don't need to use that much heat energy to get it up to a boil.
Cool.
So that was really a neat thing to do. And you can certainly, even on a low-tech way, one thing I have done, if I plan on brewing in the afternoon, is I'll draw my water and let it sit in a hot, sunny place until I get ready to brew. And that'll just naturally heat up with the ambient temperature. Obviously, in the winter, it won't work, but in the summertime, yes. And, if you do that all the time, you might have one less trip to the propane refill station every year because of that. So it saves time if you think about it.
So, I mean, you mentioned immersion chillers a minute ago, and obviously those use a tremendous amount of water. Are there any good alternatives to the traditional immersion chiller that a lot of us homebrewers use?
Well, I mean, of course, there are counterflow and plate chillers, and those are great. I mean, I haven't
more
personally,
efficient, right?
Yeah, I haven't personally used a plate chiller, although I want to, but I have a perfectly good counterflow, so it's kind of hard to justify when I do 10-gallon batches.
Yeah.
So if you can afford those, and water conservation is an important issue in your area, it's worth the investment. And if you don't have those things, there's always the sink full of water with ice around the pot. I did that many times in my early years, and I still do that when I have a gallon batch of something I'm brewing, just to try out a new idea. And that works great. I mean, it's an old chef's technique for sure. So
takes a long time, but yeah,
well, for a gallon, it's not that long.
No, yeah, that's true.
If you have 5 gallons, it takes a long time. For people who do partial boils, you can add, you can make sanitized ice, or just put water in the refrigerator the night before, pre-boiled, so that it's really nice and cold, and, do your partial boil and then dump that water in, and usually you get right around pitching temperature by doing that. And then, I've had friends who just leave the pot with the lid on overnight and then go for it. And I personally don't do that, because you end up with the DMS, and it just, anything that takes away from, reaching beer perfection is something I try to avoid personally.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy over that, I know, because some people say that they do just fine with the no-chill brewing. Theoretically, certainly you could get a slightly higher level of DMS, but it depends on a lot of other factors too. You got to look at how long did you boil it? What are you actually brewing? Like, it wouldn't even show up on many darker beers.
Exactly.
Exactly. What about post brewing? I know you're an advocate of doing something with some of the spent grains and ingredients.
Oh, actually, yeah, that's
what are some of the ideas?
I mean, nothing horrifies me more than hearing that someone just throws their grain in the trash. To me, it's such a valuable resource. And, you look at the brewing industry too. I mean, in most countries, that grain is actually sold to farmers, or in some cases, even the food industry, because it has a lot of food value. And with, hunger being an ever-present concern, even starting to be a concern here in our own country, anything with food value, we want to avoid throwing away if possible.
So I have a nice bowl of spent grains for your breakfast then, or what?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the best thing I've had with spent grains is A, bread, and B, I make these awesome energy bars. And I do, for your listeners, if they're interested, have that recipe on my website.
If you send it to me, I'll go ahead and include it in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah. But, it's a great way to... There's a lot of protein, and there's still a lot of carbs in the spent grains, and that's a great food source, and vitamins and all that good stuff.
What else could you do with it?
So besides the many, many recipes, and if you just Google spent grain recipes, you're going to find a ton, plenty to keep you busy. It's great animal feed. I keep chickens, and they love the stuff. They'd eat it all day if I gave it to them.
You're supposed to keep it away from some animals. Is that true? Breeding dogs or something? I don't know.
It's fine for dogs. My dog, Barley, she loves it, and I make dog biscuits for her.
Okay.
Out of but you have to be really
Maybe
careful.
Put that recipe on there too.
Okay. You have to be very careful that any spent grains never touch hops when it comes to feeding to especially dogs, because hops are toxic to dogs and some other animals. As far as I could tell, they're not toxic to chickens, but those just go in the compost.
I see. Well, let's go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, so moving on to fermentation, what can you do to be more responsible during fermentation?
mostly fermentation is just a natural process that happens at room temperature. I mean, where you can start to think about, your impact on the environment is energy use. And so, if you use temperature control,
which is required for a lot of loggers, obviously. Right,
unless you live in an area where you can achieve that, if you have a basement in the wintertime and it just stays at 45 or whatever in the wintertime, then you're set. But, you may want to at least consider, are you using a whole refrigerator to hold one fermenter? Maybe if you're out looking for a way to temperature control, if you consider the environmental footprint, you might want to look for a smaller refrigerator. You might want to look for something, instead of getting that $50 fridge that someone's like begging you to take away, that is probably just an energy hog. Maybe get something newer that has, even refrigerators that are 10 years old have a lot higher energy use than ones that are made today. Chest freezers are actually, because they're more highly insulated and they have a lid on the top, use a lot less energy. So they're great for temperature controlled fermentation.
Yeah, so buying a freezer is probably better than buying a refrigerator, right?
Right. Even though, you have a lot more of a lifting issue getting those things in there, and some sort of sling might help in that regard.
Well, if you got homebrewed beer, you can always get a couple buddies to help you, right?
Yeah, very true. Very true. Unless you live out in the boonies.
Yeah. What about packaging and storing your beer?
Well, fortunately, as home brewers, we're very eco-friendly because we reuse our packaging almost, all of us. Occasionally we have to go out and buy new bottles for entering competitions.
Yeah. Or gave too many away to friends, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they never give the bottles back, do they? Anyways, so reusing those bottles and kegs is just about as environmentally friendly as you can get.
Kegs are great because they just last forever.
Yeah.
Stainless steel. It's
replace a gasket here and there, and you're good to go. And a lot easier to, and if you think about it, you're using less energy to clean one keg than you are to clean 50 bottles.
Oh, it saves you a huge amount of time.
Your own energy, your human energy, and in terms of hot water and chemicals needed to clean one keg. But
I think the kegging system was probably one of the best purchases I ever made. It was a big investment up front, but once I made that investment, it's like, wow, this is great.
I mean, the only thing that goes along with a kegging system for most serious brewers is then you need a kegerator to go with it. And then you have another refrigerator that you're looking at. If you can kind of combine your kegerator and your fermentation, temperature controlled fermentation, then you're doing good. But that is something to consider. And if, I started out with the BeerSmith used fridge that someone gave me, and that thing probably made the meter spin twice as fast. It just sucked down the energy. But it held 6 kegs, so it was pretty cool at the time.
Yeah.
But when that thing finally died, I went out and got, a brand new garage mini fridge, and that thing holds 2 full kegs and a half keg. And, it's not as much beer in there, but that thing, I plugged in a kilowatt, and I can't remember what it was, but it was about a quarter of my main fridge's energy consumption. So
makes a big difference, huh?
Yeah. And if you have it in a kegerator with an outside tap, then you're not opening the door over and over again. So for those of us that, have a bunch of friends over and drink beer on an evening, that could mean a refrigerator door opening, a dozen times or more in a night. And if you have a kegerator, that's not happening at all.
Well, yeah, you get the tap on the front and that's it.
Yeah. Or top or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you had a few tips to help some of the readers out there or some of the listeners make better beer.
Well, I guess I would say, I brew with organic ingredients, but everything else is probably about the same as most good brewers. I'm very, regimented in cleaning. I'm, just a clean freak.
Actually, I mean, that's a topic we didn't cover that I missed here, but what kind of cleaning agents do you use? I know some cleaning agents are obviously very toxic for the environment.
Fortunately, what most home brewers use are pretty good. I use the 5-star products a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The PBW and the
Star Sand? Star Sand, yeah.
I also use Iodophor sometimes. When I can get my once in a while, I'll get my hands on some industrial grade hydrogen peroxide, and that's my favorite sanitizer. But you have to be careful not to touch any copper or anything that would oxidize. But it's actually one of the most effective sanitizers. It just really kills everything. And I found over the years, because I have equipment that's, some of it's probably as old as long as I've been brewing, so up to 20 years. So, those old carboys really need a good scrub out once in a while. And I find if I mix up the sanitizers I use, then anything that might develop a resistance to one thing will, fall to the new thing I introduce.
So is there anything you'd really want to avoid using?
Bleach.
Bleach?
Yeah. Yes. And there's
why is bleach so bad?
For one, the process of manufacturing it produces some of the nastiest chemicals that are released into the environment. Mm-hmm. Making household bleach is not as big of a deal as industrial strength, the bleach they use in paper mills and such.
Yeah.
But it is still part of that same process, and the organochlorine class of chemicals are persistent environmental toxins. They basically bioaccumulate in the environment. Dioxins is the worst category of these. They build up in the food chain, and once you have dioxins in your body, they don't come out. They just build up, and we are looking at a cancer epidemic in the industrialized world, and a lot of that has to do with the buildup of chemicals in our environment that are just we're being introduced to in many, many ways. And, if we can control some of those sources of intake, it's definitely something we can do. Sobering stuff to think about, but, that's what it means to be eco-conscious, is to think about, every action has a reaction. And, what actions can I take that have a positive reaction instead of a negative one?
I was wondering if you could talk for a few minutes at the end here about your book that you're working on. I know it's not coming out for, you said, close to another year, but I was wondering if you could just share with us what you're working on.
Well, it's a lot of similar to what I've talked about here. Just, a lot more factual stuff, that I've researched in the sustainable brewing world, everything from cleaning chemicals to, as I mentioned, my research on brewing equipment and the materials that it is made of and how the manufacture of those affect the environment. And, so there's some of that, but there's a lot of fun stuff, a lot of organic recipes. I talk a lot about not just organic, but sourcing locally and thinking outside the box sometimes, going to your local health food store and getting, finding that weird rice syrup or whatever it is that might be part of your next recipe, something new to try. Bulk herbs and spices. The cool thing is right now we're in this brewing renaissance, just in the craft brewing scene in general, where almost anything goes. And that just really lends itself well to brewing in an eco-friendly way. Because, a lot of times when you look at the culinary world, for instance, if, thinking farm to table, thinking locally grown, you can apply some of that thinking to brewing as well and see what comes out of your own community that you can add to your beer. Maybe, peaches are in season. Maybe you should make a peach beer. I mean, strawberries are big around here, and I've done some neat things with strawberries and strawberry mead. That was just fantastic.
Strawberries are hard, I know, because they have such a faint flavor, but
yeah, you have to use a lot. and that is one case where I found the organic strawberries far superior to the conventional ones. They just had such an intensity of flavor, and it really made a difference in the mead. The strawberry flavor really just came out. It was fantastic. I'm going to use strawberries in my first lambic that I'm working on. So very excited about that.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, it's a little bit early because the book doesn't come out for over a year, but I have started Eco Brewing Forum, and I'm trying to really invite people to be part of a community of eco-minded brewing. I mean, there's so many ideas to cover, so many great projects, and I think that eco-minded brewers can really help develop this field and bring new ideas, and just it's all good. And I just built a website, amelialoftus.com, and the Eco Brewing Forum you can link to from there.
Could you spell that out real quick? Just people that
sure.
might be listening.
It's AMELIALOFTUS.com.
Okay, great. And you have a discussion forum there, and I think you were saying you had some recipes there, possibly?
There are some recipes on the site, and then there's a link to the forum from the site. It's pretty obvious. And the forum's brand new. This is the first chance I've had to actually get the word out. So I think there's 3 of us on there right now.
Yeah, it takes some time to build a community.
You got to start somewhere. Yeah, exactly.
I remember I started my discussion forum 8 or 9 years ago, and I think, same thing. There's like 3 people on there, and then I got a couple of the users to join in, and in an hour up 20,000 users or something like that. But it takes a long.
Don't be shy. Join the conversation.
Takes a lot of years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you for being here.
It's exciting to be a part of this.
So it's great to have Amelia on the show. That was my guest today was Amelia Loftus. She's the founding member of the organic brewing supplier Seven Bridges Cooperative, and she's working on a book on eco-friendly brewing to be published next year.
Good stuff.
Well, a big thank you to Amelia Loftus for appearing on the show. If you have feedback for the show, you can go to beersmith.com/forum, our discussion forum, or beersmith.com/blog and look up this episode and leave us a comment. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.